So welcome to the PID webinar. PID, I should say, the joint webinar with counterparts in Azerbaijan. This is a webinar to understand Mr. Vusal Gasimli's book on economic growth. And I think he's written a very innovative book on economic growth, and we should all review and understand it. He's got some new concepts that we should look at, and we will also present our economic growth agenda to have a discussion across the two partner countries on growth frameworks, because I think we should all be focused on growth. That is a key issue for us, and not the IMF program as some of us think it is. So with that introduction, let me ask Dr. Gasimli. Dr. Gasimli, please present us your book on economic growth. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to meet you again. And using this opportunity, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, which is leading think tank not only in Pakistan, but in Asia, in the world, for facilitation of this meeting. Using this opportunity, I would like to extend my gratitude to Pakistan ambassador to Azerbaijan for initiating cooperation between the Center for Analysis of Economic Reforms and Communication of Azerbaijan and the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. And let me say that yesterday our parliament speaker from Pakistan, Azerbaijan and Turkey signed Baku Declaration on future cooperation among our brother states, Pakistan, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. And one more time, I would like to congratulate all of us. Today, I will introduce my book dedicated to economic growth, which is a very important issue in post-pandemic period in the world. This is content of my presentation, and the first slide is about why states have different levels of income. There's no single answer to this question from Adam Smith to the present day. Maybe the reason is in Adam Smith's time, the per capita income of richest and poorest countries differed only 4 times. But now the GDP per capita of the richest Monaco and the poorest Burundi differs 711 times. In other words, Madagascar's GDP per capita is twice more than Burundi's, as you see from this slide. Nepal than Madagascar, Ghana than Nepal, Jordan than Ghana, Cuba than Jordan, Latvia than Cuba, Japan's than Latvia, Switzerland than Japan, and finally Monaco's than Switzerland. In 2019, per capita GDP in high-income countries was more than $44,000. Upper middle-income countries, more than $9,000. Middle-income countries, more than $5,500. Low middle-income countries, more than $5,000. And low-income countries, it's about $800. Income gaps are growing not only among states, but also among people, companies, and genders. According to the Oxfam research, the wealth of the richest 1% of the world's population is twice the wealth of 6.9 billion people. Next slide is about why happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. The Russian writer Leo Tolstoy wrote in Anna Karenina that all happy families are alike and unhappy family is uniquely unhappy. This is same for economy as well. Introducing the classical approach to economic growth, Adam Smith and Ricardo identified three main factors of production: labor, capital, and land. Later, Romer and others added technology to this line. And the number of scientists, including Roderick, Acemoglu, Robinson, and others, added institutions. And finally, Hofstede, Huntington, and Engelhardt added culture as well. A long time ago, Ibn Khaldun accepted moral values in society as a basis of development. My book explains the essence of economic growth using various model approach, including the slow growth model, the neoclassical model, endogenous technological change, stochastic growth. In addition to traditional factors affecting economic growth, the role of factors was also touched upon, such as cultural diversity, narratives, and social capital in economic development. Jared Diamond considers geographical determinism as a basis of economic development, and therefore points out the first agricultural farming in the history of the world was located in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, which has favorable natural conditions. The next slide is about growth diagnostics. We discussed this issue a little bit with Dr. Nadim Ulhak in our previous meeting. Nobel laureate Esther Duflo wrote in the Economist as Plumber article that since economists support governments develop more and more new policies and regulations, they go into the details of public policy and thus provide a plumbing approach. When theoretical approach are not enough, the plumber knows what can work in the real world. Hausmann, Ricardo, and Velasco in their growth diagnostics article developed an analytical framework that formed a tool to identify binding constraints to growth in each country and concluded that reforms might be successful if targeting binding constraints. By the way, Hausmann was my professor in Harvard University, and we discussed a lot about growth diagnostics issues. Growth diagnostic approach is motivated by three considerations. First, while development is a broad concept entailing the raising of human capabilities in general, we believe increasing economic growth rates is a central challenge that developing nations face. Higher levels of living standards are the most direct route to achieving improvements in social and human indicators. Reform strategies should be principally targeted at raising rates of growth. They should be growth strategies. Second, trying to come up with an identical growth strategy for all countries, regardless of their circumstances, is unlikely to prove productive. Growth strategies are likely to differ according to domestic opportunities and constraints. For example, in our case, in Azerbaijan, we are top reformer country according to Doing Business delivered by World Bank in 2 consecutive years. But we understand that recipe delivered by World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and other organizations are not enough to find out domestic opportunities and constraints, binding constraints. That's why we need, first of all, to provide right diagnostics. Third, it is seldom helpful to provide governments with a long list of reforms, many of which may not be targeted at the most binding constraints on economic growth. And we have experience in last century in Latin America about that case. Governments face administrative and political limitations, and their policymaking capital is better deployed in elevating binding constraints than in going after too many targets all at once. So growth strategies require a sense of priorities. My next slide is about problem-driven iterative adaptation, or solution and leader-driven approach. Matt Andrews, my professor from Harvard University, Lon Pritchett and Michael Woolcock developed problem-driven iterative adaptation, a step-by-step approach which helps you break down your problems into its root cause, identify entry points, search for possible solutions, take action, reflect upon what you have learned, adapt, and then act again. In other words, iterate and adapt. It is a dynamic process with tight feedback loops that allows you to build your own solution to your problem that fits your local context. PDIA is a learning by doing approach. The PDIA approach rests on 4 principles. First of all, local solutions for local problems. The second one, pushing problem-driven positive deviance. Third one, try, learn, iterate, adapt. And the last point, scale through diffusion. It is important to deconstruct the problem that hinders economic growth, that is, to break it down into details. It's possible to penetrate into the problem with the Japanese 5 why questions or fish skeleton methods. In this way, for example, Toyota was able to bring its production to an almost perfect level by finding and treating the root cause of the problems. Deliberation councils with the participation of government, business, and civil society representatives can shed light on problems in the value chain. The experience of countries that have shown economic miracles in Asia proves the effectiveness of deliberation councils. For example, in Japan, which has about 200 deliberation councils, there's even a council that solves the problems of sumo wrestling. In keeping with the spirit of stakeholder capitalism, discussions involving all stakeholders have the potential to accurately diagnose economic problems. Last week, I visited to Uzbekistan and I learned about the experience on government accelerators. This is a type of deliberation council in Uzbekistan, which initiated and supported by United Arab Emirates. This approach might be very useful for both for Azerbaijan and for Pakistan as well. By the way, under business commission, we have 19 deliberation councils, in other words, working groups dedicated to special indicators delivered by World Bank Doing Business Report, competitiveness report, and other very important, approach over the world. My next slide is about AAA. After identifying the the problems of economic growth, the AAA, authority, acceptance, and ability approach can be applied to answer the question of where to start. First, it is important to have the authority to ensure economic growth, then all stakeholders must understand and accept the problem. And this is somehow ownership of the situation, and form a sense of ownership. And third, have the ability. My next slide is about behavioral approach. An economist must have both theoretical training and practical skills to make the right policy decisions. In the 1960s, it was thought that Standard Oil, Communist Party, and Catholic Church were the best planned and managed organizations. The future was as planned. Later, strategic management came to the fore. The modern world requires not only to plan at the macro level, but also to be flexible and agile in accordance with the requirements of the day and the challenge of the future. On the business level, for example, McKinsey recommends even combining agile approach with lean management. For the past 40 years, prominent figures in the behavioral economy, such as Daniel Kahneman, Robert Schiller, Richard Thaler, Angus Deaton, and others, challenge the principle of rationality of individuals, which underlies classical theory. Behavioral economics emphasizes the role of psychology in people's decision-making and economic behavior, as well as the relationship between rational, perceptual, and emotional process. Some even believe that 70% of human decisions are emotional and 30% are rational. Gallup's research added a new color to economic growth. Behavioral economics play an important role in ensuring high growth and profitability. Thus, companies applying the principles of behavioral economics show 85% more sales growth and 25% more profit growth than their competitors. Gallup's research shows that behavioral economics has the potential to collect low-hanging fruits rather than Six Sigma or lean management. Gallup teaches business leaders how to achieve real growth by understanding human nature. And the law on artificial intelligence proposed by the European Commission will set the new requirements for the applied artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will give a new tone to economic relations by adopting new scale, new stage, taking into account not only human mind, but also emotions. Meanwhile, it is impossible to agree with the statements about the negative impact of the fourth industrial revolution on employment, because during the previous three industrial revolutions, such concerns did not justify themselves. There's fifth generation geotechnological competition in the digital age in the world. My next slide is about economic complexity of Pakistan. And starting from this slide, I would like to present Pakistan's case from the perspective of economic development, or in other words, economic growth. Economic complexity, as you know, expresses the diversity and sophistication of the productive capabilities embedded in the exports of each country. The Economic Complexity Index has been shown to explain income difference across countries and predict future growth better than any other single measure. Pakistan ranks as the 99th most complex country in the Economic Complexity Index ranking. Compared to a decade prior, Pakistan's economy has become less complex, worsening 20 positions in the Economic Complexity Index ranking. Pakistan's worsening complexity has occurred in spite of the increasing diversification of its exports, as the country has diversified into lower complexity products. Moving forward, Pakistan is positioned to take advantage of many opportunities to diversify its production using its existing know-how. I think this is case for other developing nations like Azerbaijan. Research from the Gross Lab finds that countries whose exports are more complex than expected for their income level grow faster. Growth can therefore be driven by a process of diversifying know-how to produce a broader and increasingly more complex set of goods and services. Pakistan is as complex as expected for its income level. As a result, its economy is projected to grow moderately. The Growth Lab's 2028 growth projections foresee growth in Pakistan of 4 as you see here, 6%, 4.6% annually over the coming decade, ranking in the top quartile of countries globally. It's enough, high level of growth for Pakistan. Pakistan has not yet started the traditional process of structural transformation, according to Growth Lab research. A key source of economic growth, this process reallocates economic activity from low to high productivity sectors. It broadly moves activities out of agriculture into textiles, followed by electronic and machinery manufacturing. Global market share in textile exports in Pakistan has stagnated over the previous decade. Electronics and machinery have yet to take off in Pakistan, limiting its income growth. Pakistan's exporting dynamic in the past 5 years has been driven by stone. Worryingly, as a result of economic growth in Pakistan has been hindered by concentrating in a declining sector of global exports. Economic growth is driven by diversification into new products that are incrementally more complex. Pakistan has added 21 new products since 2003, and these products contributed $2 in income per capita in 2018. Pakistan has diversified into a sufficient number of new products, but at too small a volume to contribute to substantial economic growth. And next slide explains more Pakistan's position. Pakistan's existing know-how affords many opportunities to diversify into related products. In diversifying its economy, Pakistan may consider a parsimonious industrial policy approach, like Greece, Denmark, Canada, Croatia. Limited opportunities require addressing bottlenecks to help jump short distance into related products. And my last but not least slide is about cubic Rubik, which I developed in my book, Economic Growth. This is a three-dimensional approach on economic growth. In fact, the problem of economic growth is unique in each country, and the recipe for economic growth is therefore different. Former US President Ronald Reagan stated that there is no limit to growth because there is no limit to human intelligence, imagination, and wonder. If this were not the case, then the economic growth would not still be the main topic of discussion, even though the world economy, which was only $183 billion at the beginning of our era, is now over $100 trillion. Imagine that in 1820, the world's GDP per capita was $1,102. In 2018, this figure was 15 times higher, $15,212. Economic growth were particularly rapid over the past 50 years. The pace of economic growth began to vary sharply across regions and countries. And my book analyzed the nature of economic growth and the resulting inequality, as well as provides policy proposals. In 1990, per capita GDP in Latin America was more than a quarter of the US income level, while per capita GDP in developing Asian countries was only 5% of the corresponding US figure. From 1990 to 2019, Asian countries' economy quadrupled, but Latin America still remained at the same level. The reason for this was that Asia had twice as much investment as Latin America. However, the countries of Central, Eastern, and Southeast Europe, which at that time attracted less investment than Asia, also developed faster than Latin America. The explanation for this fact was related to the quality of institutions and human capital. In general, the level of productivity of the economy is more important for economic growth. Otherwise, Mexico would not have a lower rate of economic growth in the last 25 years if it had attracted more investment relative to GDP than Poland. The same amount of investment provides different levels of economic growth in different countries. Yes, investment boosts the economy, but to a certain extent. In the long run, the driver of economic growth is not investment, labor, and natural resources, but productivity. Only then more economic growth might be achieved with the same amount of production. If the economy operates efficiently, it will attract both investment and skilled labor. Our conclusion is that the economy must be efficient. For these factors such as stability, quality of institutions, human capital, technology, infrastructure, favorable business climate, access to markets, participation in global value chains, cultural codes that trigger development, cultural and ethnic diversity, identity, narratives, behavioral economics, and social capital must be taken into account. Each country can ensure economic growth only by creating its own bunch of these factors. Along with global challenge, such as technological revolution and the shift of the center of the capital from west to east, as well as global climate change, the new conditions created by the COVID-19 pandemic affect the trajectory of economic growth. The fiscal space and quality of the institutions, as well as digital solutions and green growth paradigms, are essential for the continuation of public policies supporting economic growth. A little bit about my country. Along with the post-pandemic era, the post-conflict period also created new conditions for economic growth in Azerbaijan. And I analyze this situation in my book, Economic Growth. The goal of Azerbaijan economy, which more than tripled in the last 17 years, to double in the next 10 years, is a basis for improving the state's objectives, including social welfare. And this is our only choice because we have not alternative in post-pandemic and post-conflict period. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to deliver my book presentation in front of you. And thank you for your patience. And it will be my pleasure to answer your questions. Thank you very much.